This is stage 17, Fullerville second pass, 4.49 miles.
Thank you very much.
And all those dings you were hearing was actually our awesome rally core, our rally computer. Okay, we are armed. I just have to hit the arm button. I don't have to do anything else. It starts itself. 15 seconds. This is a right 5 minus over small crest into left 5 over crest, 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go! Nah. Right 5 minus over small crest into left 5 over crest. Can't find them. There we go. 70, right 5, 30, small crest 50, left 5 minus into right 5, left 6, into caution small crest, into right 4 short, into turn left 3 plus deceptive, left 3 plus deceptive. Opens long, tightens 5 over crest 50, left 5 plus over crest 30, right 3 plus. Here's your left 5 plus. There's your right 3 plus. Into left 5 plus, 50. Right 5, 30, small crest. Into left 4 plus, no cut. Next. Into right 5 minus. Left 6, very long, kings 180. Florence. Left 6 plus over small jump 30, right 5 plus 100. Go, go, go.
No, something fell in my face.
Right 5 plus 100. Right 5 minus opens over small. Left 5 minus opens over small crest. Sorry, 70. Stay left over small crest 100. Left 6 tightens into right 4 plus over crest 30. There's your right 4 plus over crest 30. Right 5, no cut, 30. Caution, left 3 over small jump, tightens 70. Repeat, left 3 over small jump, tightens 70. Right 4 plus long, opens long, 120. Right 6. Left 6 over small crest. Into right 6 plus no cut. There's your left 6 over small crest to right 6 plus no cut. Left 6, 70. Right 5 minus over small crest into left 5, 120. Right 5, 30. Left 5 plus opens long over crest, go 50. Right 6 plus over small crest, long over small crest. Into right 5 over crest, go 150. Go, go, go. Left 6 plus 100. Flat small crest 600. So just floor it. Go, go, go. Don't left. At the end is a left 5 loose, long 100. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Past that next crest. Go, 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 go. Go, go, go.
Shut up.
There's your left 5 loose, long 100. Caution, brake, left 3 plus, tightens loose, 30. Right 4 plus, loose, 30. Right 5 plus long, loose, go. Into left 6 plus, over crest, go. 30. Left 6 plus long, go. Into left 5, go. Right 6 long, over long crest, go. 250. Chicane left entry. Go, go, go. Too early. 600 over double foam crest. Brake, small crest into left 4 minus. Keep going, keep going, keep going. There's your brake, small crest into left 4 minus. 50. Right 5, 150. Go, go, go. Right 6 into finish, 50. Right 6 over small crest, 100. You're done. Good job. High five.
Well done.
You too. Hey. Doing great. Thank you, and thanks for working, guys.